The morning train from Chicago cut through October mist like a blade through silk. Mason Hayes pressed his temple against the cold window, watching cornfields blur past in endless golden waves. His backpack sat wedged between tired legs, stuffed with the remnants of a life held together by prayer and caffeine. Inside that worn canvas bag lived his last hope, a scholarship interview at Montana State that could change everything, or end it all. He had been awake since 3, his studio apartment in Pilsen too loud for rest, too expensive for comfort. 3 years since his family cut him off. 3 years since coming out shattered the Hayes family Christmas dinner like a dropped wine glass. His mother's silence still echoed louder than his father's shouted words. The train's rhythm became his lullaby, exhaustion heavier than the October air pressing against the windows. Across the aisle sat Connor Wellington, though Mason didn't know that name yet. Connor appeared composed in his dark wool coat, tablet balanced on steady hands, but his mind wrestled with troubles of its own. At 35, he carried the weight of Riverbend Ranch like a stone in his chest. 4 generations of Wellington legacy pressing down on shoulders that had learned to bear more than they should. His parents expected an engagement announcement by Thanksgiving, preferably to Sarah Mitchell, whose family owned the neighboring spread. They had no idea their son's heart belonged elsewhere, somewhere they could never accept. The train swayed gently through the Montana approach, and Mason's eyes grew heavy. His notes on agricultural economics blurred into meaningless columns. Sleep pulled at him like gravity, and despite every intention to stay alert, his head tilted once, twice, then came to rest against Connor's shoulder. Connor froze. No one had touched him with such trust in years, certainly not another man, not with the quiet vulnerability of complete exhaustion. Mason's breathing deepened, his face peaceful for the first time since boarding. Connor studied the stranger's features, the dark lashes against pale skin, the way his lips parted slightly in sleep. Something stirred in Connor's chest. Recognition mixed with longing, a feeling he thought he had buried beneath ranch duties and family expectations. Minutes stretched into an hour. The conductor's voice crackled through speakers announcing billings. But Mason didn't stir. Connor found himself adjusting his position carefully, ensuring the sleeping man's comfort, while his own heart hammered against his ribs. When Mason finally woke, confusion clouded his features as he realized where he was, who he had been leaning against. Connor's voice was gentle when he explained the missed stop, the rural station they were approaching called Millfield. He offered what seemed impossible: a ride to his ranch until the next train, a few hours of rest in a place that felt like sanctuary. Mason's instincts screamed caution, but something in Connor's steady gaze, the absence of judgment or pity, made him nod acceptance. The drive to Riverbend Ranch revealed Montana in all its autumn glory. Rolling pastures stretched toward mountains that touched the sky like cathedral spires. Connor's truck hummed along gravel roads while Mason absorbed details. The cedar scent lingering in the cab, the way Connor's calloused hands moved with practiced ease on the wheel. When the ranch appeared through a grove of cottonwoods, Mason's breath caught in his throat. Riverbend Ranch sprawled across the landscape like something from a Western movie, but lived in and real. The main house stood proud on a gentle rise. White clapboard siding weathered to silver gray, wraparound porch adorned with hanging baskets of late-season flowers. Barns and outbuildings dotted the property like notes on a musical staff, each structure speaking of purpose and permanence. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez emerged from the kitchen door, flour dusting her apron, warm brown eyes crinkling with curiosity as Connor introduced his unexpected guest. She welcomed Mason with the kind of smile that made strangers feel like family. Ushering him toward the guest room while Connor explained about missed connections and train schedules. The room overlooked the ranch's heart, where horses grazed in paddocks and cattle dotted distant pastures. Mason sat on the edge of a quilt his grandmother might have made, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers, the beauty of this place, the growing certainty that something profound had shifted the moment his head touched Connor's shoulder. Sometimes the most important journeys begin not with grand destinations, but with simple moments of human connection. When two souls recognize something familiar in each other across the space between strangers and family, Mason accepted Connor's job offer 3 days later, though not without reservation. The salary seemed too generous, the housing too perfect. Connor's kindness, too good to be true. His last relationship had ended when Derek, his college boyfriend, reported Mason's orientation to his parents out of spite. Trust had become a luxury Mason couldn't afford. Yet something about Riverbend Ranch called to parts of himself he thought had died in his family's living room 3 years ago. The cabin by the lake became Mason's sanctuary, a one-bedroom structure built from local timber with windows facing the water. Connor had insisted on only $250 monthly rent, claiming anything more would be unfair for such a small space. Mason suspected charity disguised as business, but Connor's explanation made practical sense. The ranch needed qualified help managing finances, and housing retention was simply good business practice. October melted into November, painting the ranch in shades of gold and burgundy. Mason threw himself into work with the precision of someone who understood that competence was armor, that making himself indispensable was the closest thing to security he might find. Connor's financial records revealed someone who understood cattle and horses, but approached spreadsheets like archaeological artifacts. Mrs. Rodriguez became Mason's anchor to the ranch's rhythm. She taught him to read weather patterns in the mountains, to recognize the different sounds cattle made when content versus distressed. Her stories filled the kitchen with warmth while she prepared meals that could feed small armies. She never asked why a young man with obvious education had ended up alone on a Montana ranch, but her kindness suggested she recognized refugees when she saw them. Tom Bradley, the ranch foreman, proved to be a man of few words but infinite patience. He showed Mason the practical side of ranch operations, from feeding schedules to equipment maintenance, never condescending when Mason's city background showed. Tom's weathered hands could repair anything, and his quiet competence reminded Mason that strength came in many forms. Jake Morrison arrived at Riverbend in late November, a 24-year-old cowboy with an easy smile and stories that could last until dawn. He bunked in the ranch hand's quarters but spent most evenings at Mason's cabin, the two young men finding friendship in shared experiences of being different in small-town America. Jake's presence made Mason feel less alone, less like an experiment Connor might grow tired of. Connor remained enigmatic, professional during work hours but distant when the day ended. Mason caught glimpses of something deeper in unguarded moments. When Connor thought no one was watching, the way his eyes lingered when Mason explained spreadsheet functions, the careful space he maintained between them when reviewing reports, suggested internal battles Mason recognized from his own mirror. Thanksgiving approached with family obligations Connor couldn't avoid. His parents expected him home in Bozeman, and worse, they expected Sarah Mitchell to join them. Connor's mood darkened as the date approached, his usual steady demeanor replaced by something that looked like dread. Mason tried to offer support without overstepping, bringing coffee during late-night planning sessions, organizing reports with extra care. The ranch felt hollow during Connor's absence. Mason used the time to explore his growing comfort with this place, riding fence lines with Jake, learning to handle the quarter horses Connor had trained. The animals responded to patience and consistency, qualities Mason was rediscovering in himself. In quiet moments by the lake, he allowed himself to imagine staying beyond winter, putting down roots in soil that felt welcoming. Connor returned from Thanksgiving, subdued, speaking little about family dinner, but carrying tension in his shoulders like a yoke. Mason wanted to ask what had happened, but their friendship existed in professional boundaries neither had permission to cross. Instead, he focused on year-end financial preparations, organizing records that would make tax season manageable. December snow transformed the ranch into something magical, white-covered pastures stretching toward mountains that seemed to touch heaven. Mason discovered peace in winter chores, the meditative quality of feeding horses while snow fell like blessing around them. Jake taught him to read snow conditions, to recognize when storms were building in the peaks. These skills felt precious, knowledge that connected him to land in ways his urban childhood never had. The first blizzard of winter trapped them all indoors for 3 days. Mrs. Rodriguez kept the kitchen warm with soup and fresh bread, while Mason worked on financial projections. Connor joined him in the evenings, ostensibly to review numbers, but really, Mason suspected, to avoid the silence of his own house. Their conversations grew more personal, touching on books they both loved, places they hoped to travel. One evening, as wind howled around the cabin walls, Connor mentioned his grandfather's dream of making Riverbend Ranch a model of sustainable agriculture. His voice carried reverence when he spoke of the old man who had built this place with bare hands and stubborn hope. Mason found himself sharing memories of his grandmother, the only family member who had tried to understand when he came out. Her death had left him truly alone, cutting the last thread connecting him to the Hayes family name. Christmas approached with the weight of memories neither man wanted to carry alone. Mason volunteered to stay at the ranch while others visited family, but Connor quietly arranged holiday bonuses that would allow everyone to travel. He planned to remain at Riverbend himself, claiming someone needed to tend the animals. The prospect of spending Christmas together both thrilled and terrified Mason, who had learned to expect disappointment from holidays but couldn't help hoping for something different. In the space between friendship and something deeper, two men learned that healing begins when we stop protecting ourselves from connection and start building trust, one careful moment at a time. January brought brutal cold and the kind of clarity that comes from Montana winters, when every breath burns and the world reduces to essential truths. Mason had been managing Connor's finances for 3 months when he discovered the inconsistency that would change everything. It appeared as a monthly payment of $8,000 to something called Hartwell Financial Consulting, buried in miscellaneous expenses with vague descriptions like advisory services and strategic planning. The payments stretched back 18 months, always on different dates, never with supporting documentation. Mason's accounting training had taught him to recognize patterns, and this one felt wrong. Legitimate consulting fees followed predictable schedules with clear deliverables. These payments looked like something else entirely, something Connor was trying to hide even from his own records. Confronting Connor required courage. Mason wasn't sure he possessed. Their relationship had grown warmer through winter evenings spent over financial reports. Conversations that touched on everything except the tension that crackled between them whenever their hands brushed over paperwork. Mason had learned to read Connor's moods in the set of his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when phone calls came from his parents. The conversation took place in Connor's office on a February morning when snow fell thick enough to muffle sound. Mason laid the printouts on Connor's desk with hands that trembled slightly, watching Connor's face go pale as recognition dawned. For a long moment, neither man spoke, the weight of secrets pressing down like the snow outside. Connor's explanation came slowly, painfully, like extracting splinters from a wound. 18 months ago, Richard Hartwell had appeared at the ranch with documents Connor thought had been destroyed years earlier. Loan applications from Connor's desperate 20s. When the ranch was hemorrhaging money and his grandfather was dying, Connor had altered financial statements to qualify for emergency credit, intending to repay everything once cattle prices recovered. Hartwell had worked at the bank then, a young loan officer who had processed Connor's application without noticing the irregularities. Years later, when Hartwell lost his own job and needed money, he had found those documents and recognized their value, not as evidence of fraud, but as leverage. Connor had been paying ever since, watching money hemorrhage from accounts while Hartwell's threats grew more sophisticated. The extortion had evolved beyond simple blackmail. Hartwell had connected with local officials, had built relationships with people who could make life difficult for a ranch owner under scrutiny. He claimed to have evidence not just of financial fraud, but of environmental violations, worker safety issues, tax irregularities. Whether the evidence was real or fabricated didn't matter. In a county where reputation determined everything, accusations alone could destroy what 4 generations had built. Mason listened with growing anger, not at Connor's past mistakes, but at the systematic way Hartwell was bleeding him dry. $86,000 had vanished into Hartwell's accounts, money that could have improved worker housing, upgraded equipment, expanded the ranch's sustainable practices Connor cared about. This wasn't justice or accountability. This was predation disguised as consequence. Connor's shame was palpable as he described the isolation of carrying this burden alone. He had considered selling the ranch, disappearing somewhere his family name wouldn't follow. He had thought about suicide during the darkest weeks, when it seemed like the only way to end the bleeding without destroying his family's legacy. Mason's presence had changed that calculation, given him reasons to hope for solutions beyond surrender. The conversation was interrupted by Connor's phone buzzing with a call from his mother. Margaret Wellington's voice carried through the speaker with news that Sarah Mitchell had been asking when Connor planned to propose, that her parents expected an announcement by spring. Connor's responses grew shorter, more strained, until he finally hung up with promises to discuss it later. Mason watched Connor's composure crack, the careful control he maintained around others finally giving way. Connor was carrying multiple secrets, multiple pressures that were slowly crushing him. The Hartwell situation was only one weight in a load that included family expectations, personal authenticity, and the growing feelings neither man had acknowledged aloud. Their conversation was interrupted again, this time by Tom Bradley knocking urgently on the office door. One of the quarter horses had broken through ice on the stock pond and was trapped in freezing water. The emergency demanded immediate action. Connor and Mecklenburg dropping everything to help with a rescue that would require all hands and careful coordination. Mason had never been on a horse in dangerous conditions, but Connor insisted he was needed, that every person mattered in a situation like this. The rescue took 3 hours in brutal wind, Mason following Connor's instructions while learning to trust both the horse beneath him and his own instincts. When they finally pulled the mare to safety, both men were soaked and shivering, but something had shifted between them in the shared intensity of saving something precious. Back at the ranch house, while Mrs. Rodriguez fussed over them with hot coffee and warm clothes, Connor looked at Mason with something approaching gratitude mixed with amazement. Mason had not only discovered Connor's deepest secret, but had responded with support instead of judgment. He had stayed when he could have left, had offered help instead of condemnation. That night, sitting by the fire in Connor's living room while their clothes dried, both men understood that their relationship had crossed into territory neither had planned to explore. Mason's presence had become essential to Connor's functioning, while Connor's trust had given Mason something he thought he had lost forever, a place where he belonged exactly as he was. Between the crackling logs and the silence of snow-covered Montana, two men learned that the greatest intimacy comes not from hiding our struggles, but from allowing someone to share the weight of carrying them. March arrived with an unexpected thaw that turned ranch roads to mud and brought visitors Connor had been dreading. His parents' black SUV appeared on a Tuesday morning, unannounced and unwelcome, carrying William and Margaret Wellington along with expectations Connor could no longer meet. They found him in the barn with Mason, both men covered in dust from mucking stalls, close enough in conversation that his mother's eyebrows rose with concern. The confrontation that followed would reshape everything. In the ranch house living room, surrounded by 4 generations of Wellington family portraits, William demanded explanations for Connor's continued bachelorhood. Sarah Mitchell had been patient, but her father was growing suspicious of Connor's reluctance to propose. The family name required continuation. The ranch needed an heir, and Connor's obligations superseded any personal reservations he might harbor. Margaret's approach was softer, but no less insistent. She spoke of grandchildren she longed to hold, of Christmas mornings filled with young voices, of the emptiness that would consume the ranch house if Connor failed to fulfill his biological destiny. Her words carried the weight of maternal disappointment mixed with genuine fear that their family line might die with their only son. Connor's response surprised them all, including himself. Instead of the apologetic deflection they expected, he spoke with quiet determination about the life he wanted to build, the truth he could no longer hide from people who claimed to love him. His words came slowly at first, then faster as 3 years of suppressed honesty poured out like water through a broken dam. The silence that followed Connor's revelations stretched long enough for snow to begin falling outside the windows. William's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and something approaching grief, while Margaret sat frozen in her chair as if the words themselves had turned her to stone. When William finally spoke, His voice carried the brittle quality of something breaking beyond repair. The ultimatum was swift and absolute. Connor had until the end of April to announce his engagement to Sarah Mitchell, or forfeit his inheritance and position as ranch manager. The property would pass to their cousins in Wyoming. The Wellington name would continue through other branches, and Connor would be free to live whatever life he chose somewhere else, with someone else's money and someone else's legacy. Margaret said nothing during William's pronouncement, but tears tracked down her cheeks with the silence of snow against windows. She had spent 35 years loving a son who was now revealing himself to be someone entirely different from the man she thought she knew. Her grief was not just for his choices, but for the grandchildren she would never hold, the future she had planned that would never exist after his parents left. Connor walked through the ranch buildings like a ghost visiting scenes of his former life. Every structure held memories of his grandfather's voice, stories of hardship overcome and dreams fulfilled through stubborn perseverance. The weight of potentially losing all of it pressed down on him like the Montana sky on gray days when clouds touch the earth. Mason found him in the equipment barn that evening, sitting on an overturned feed bucket, staring at tractors his grandfather had restored by hand. Connor's composure had finally shattered completely, leaving him vulnerable in ways Mason had never witnessed. The conversation that followed required courage from both men. Honesty about feelings neither had dared acknowledge aloud. Mason's confession came first. 3 years of loneliness spilling out along with his growing feelings for a man who represented everything he thought he could never have. He spoke of watching Connor move through his days with quiet strength, of finding purpose in work that felt meaningful instead of merely necessary. He admitted to imagining a future at Riverbend Ranch that extended far beyond employment, a life built alongside someone who understood both duty and dreams. Connor's response was equally raw. 3 months of suppressed attraction mixing with the terror of losing everything he had been raised to protect. He described lying awake at night, thinking about Mason's laugh during dinner conversations, the way his hands moved with precision over paperwork, the comfort of having someone who understood the weight of family expectations without needing explanation. Their first kiss happened against the background of wind through barn rafters, tentative and careful. Both men understanding that this moment changed everything while solving nothing. The taste of truth mixed with the salt of tears as they held each other in the half-light of Montana dusk. Two souls finally acknowledging what their hearts had known since that first train ride. The ranch hands had suspected for weeks what the main house was just discovering. Tom Bradley's knowing nods, Mrs. Rodriguez's extra place settings at dinner, Jake Morrison's protective presence whenever outsiders visited. All suggested a community that was ahead of the Wellington family in accepting realities Connor was only now brave enough to claim. April brought its own challenges as Connor struggled with the impossible choice between family legacy and personal authenticity. The ranch was hemorrhaging money to Hartwell's extortion, while Connor's emotional state affected his decision-making abilities. Mason watched the man he loved disappearing under the weight of pressures that seemed designed to break even the strongest spirit. The solution emerged from an unexpected source. Sarah Mitchell appeared at the ranch on a rain-soaked Thursday, not with engagement expectations, but with confessions of her own. Her relationship with her roommate from college had evolved beyond friendship into something her family would never accept. She had been dreading Connor's proposal as much as he had been avoiding making it. Their conversation lasted 3 hours. Two people trapped by family expectations finally finding honesty with each other. Sarah's support became Connor's first ally in a battle that would require strategic thinking rather than emotional surrender. She agreed to help deflect her parents' questions, while Connor figured out how to build a life that honored his truth without destroying his heritage. Together, they began planning a future that neither of their families had envisioned, but both of their hearts required. Learning that sometimes the greatest courage is not in fighting for what others expect, but in building something authentic from the ruins of their disappointments. May arrived at Riverbend Ranch with the kind of morning light that made everything seem possible. Connor had spent sleepless weeks preparing for conversations that could either destroy his family or finally heal wounds that had festered in silence for too long. His decision to host a family dinner with full disclosure required courage he had been building since that first honest conversation with Mason in the equipment barn. Margaret came alone. William had refused the invitation, claiming business obligations that everyone understood were really emotional barricades too high to climb. She sat at the kitchen table where Mrs. Rodriguez served her famous enchiladas, watching Connor and Mason move around each other with the natural rhythm of two people who had learned to share space, responsibility, and something deeper than either had dared hope for. The conversation that followed would become family legend. 3 hours of truth-telling that began with tears and ended with something approaching understanding. Margaret's questions came slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as she tried to reconcile the son she had raised with the man sitting across from her. Her grief for the grandchildren she had imagined was real, but her love for Connor proved stronger than her disappointment. Mason's presence during this conversation was crucial in ways none of them had anticipated. His quiet dignity, his obvious devotion to Connor, his respectful engagement with Margaret's concerns, slowly shifted her perspective from seeing him as the destroyer of her dreams to recognizing him as her son's salvation. When she finally asked about their plans for the future, her voice carried curiosity instead of judgment. The Hartwell situation reached its resolution through negotiation rather than confrontation. Mason's research had revealed Richard Hartwell's daughter Emma was indeed seriously ill, but also that Hartwell possessed genuine financial consulting skills that had been wasted since losing his bank position. Connor's proposal was elegant in its simplicity: convert the extortion into legitimate employment, channel Hartwell's expertise toward ranch expansion, and share the profits instead of bleeding them away. The meeting took place in Connor's office on a June morning when sunlight streamed through windows and made everything seem clean and possible. Hartwell arrived expecting another payment, but found instead a job offer that acknowledged his talents while redirecting his desperation into productive channels. Connor's willingness to trust someone who had been bleeding him dry spoke to a kind of forgiveness that surprised everyone, including Mason. Emma's medical needs became the ranch's first charitable project, Connor and Mason establishing a fund that would cover her treatments while creating a model for supporting other families facing similar crises. Hartwell's gratitude transformed into loyalty as he discovered that legitimate success felt better than stolen money ever had. His financial expertise, properly channeled, helped Riverbend Ranch expand into organic certification and agritourism that doubled their revenue within 2 years. The community's response to Connor and Mason's relationship was mixed but generally positive. Montana's live and let live philosophy proving stronger than prejudice for most neighbors. The ranch's success spoke louder than gossip, and Connor's reputation for fairness earned respect that extended to acceptance of his personal choices. Some families drove their children past the ranch to whisper about the two men who lived there, but others brought their teenagers to learn about sustainable farming from people who had built something worth emulating. Jake Morrison's decision to bring his boyfriend home for the annual ranch rodeo marked a turning point for the entire community. Tyler Chen, a veterinarian from Billings, proved invaluable during the event when several animals needed medical attention. Their competence and obvious affection for each other helped normalize what some locals had considered an abstract concept. Love, it turned out, looked the same regardless of the genders involved. William's eventual reconciliation took 18 months and required Margaret's patient diplomacy, but it happened during a Christmas dinner where Connor's happiness was too obvious to ignore. His acceptance came not from understanding, but from recognition that his son had built something meaningful, despite following a path William couldn't comprehend. The ranch was thriving. The community respected Connor's leadership, and the legacy William cared about was continuing in ways he had never imagined. The wedding took place at Riverbend Ranch on a September morning when autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and scarlet. 300 guests gathered under Montana sky, including family members who had traveled from across the country to witness love triumph over fear. Sarah Mitchell served as Connor's best woman, her own relationship with her college roommate now openly acknowledged and supported by families who had learned that happiness took many forms. Mrs. Rodriguez orchestrated the reception with military precision, transforming the main barn into a celebration space that honored both tradition and change. Tom Bradley's toast brought tears to eyes accustomed to prairie winds. His words about watching two good men build a life worth living resonating with everyone who had witnessed their journey from strangers to partners in every sense of the word. The Wellington Hayes Foundation launched 6 months after the wedding, focused on supporting LGBTQ+ youth in rural communities where resources were scarce and acceptance was still evolving. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship programs, and safe spaces for young people whose families had rejected them or who were struggling with identity in places where difference was often viewed with suspicion. 5 years later, Riverbend Ranch had become a model for progressive agriculture and inclusive community building. The guest cabin by the lake served as a retreat center for couples from across the Mountain West, while the main operations provided employment for 30 families and supported another dozen through supply contracts. Connor and Mason's adoption of 12-year-old Alex, a transgender boy from the foster system, completed their family while creating ripple effects of acceptance throughout their community. Standing on the porch of the ranch house they had renovated together, watching Alex play with the border collie puppies while autumn light painted everything golden, Connor and Mason understood that their love had become more than personal happiness. It had become proof that authenticity could coexist with tradition, that acceptance could grow in the most unlikely soil, and that sometimes the greatest legacy is not the land we inherit, but the love we choose to plant there. Have you ever had to choose between the life others expected and the one your heart demanded? Tell us in the comments below, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Follow Heart Stories for more tales of courage, love, and the beautiful complexity of building family from hope instead of obligation.